Hi, this is John Pettigrew, and you're listening to Talking Through My Hat, a podcast that explores bookish businesses, the fantastic people who create them, and what those people have learned. I'm a hat wearer, a recovering editor, and the creator of Future Proofs, enabling editors and authors to work better online. To find out more, visit wearefutureproofs.com or follow me on Twitter at John_Pettigrew. Welcome to this week's Talking Through My Hat. Today I'm talking with Joanna Penn, New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. She spent more than a decade as an IT consultant, but's now much better known as a writer of thrillers, fantasy, romance and non-fiction, as an award-winning entrepreneur, a publishing commentator, a podcast and YouTuber, with a focus on giving authors the information and inspiration they need to get published. So welcome to the podcast, Joanna.
Oh, thanks for having me, John. It's good to be here.
Yeah. You seem to have so much going on these days, but how do you describe your business when you meet someone for the first time? They ask you what do you do?
Oh, well, you know how this goes. It depends who you're talking to and it depends what event you're at. So I would generally say I'm an author and see what the response is. Because primarily I am an author. That's where this all comes from. I'm an author first. If I'm somewhere else, I'll say I have my own publishing company because that is the other thing I do. I publish books. And so those are probably my two answers. I'm an author and I run my own, I guess because this is a publishing industry type show, I'm kind of a micro publisher. I publish my own books. I write under three names, although two names again now. You mentioned the romance. I was co-writing romance with my mum, but decided I'm such a dark writer. I write more like Stephen King. And in the end, I've let my mum go free. So she's doing the romance. So I'm no longer doing romance. It's a very hard genre.
I did wonder how that fitted in thematically. It seemed quite interesting.
Yeah, well, I think one of the joys, of running your own business is that you can help people that you love do things that they want to do. And, my mum hit sort of 68 and didn't know what to do with her life. And I was like, hey, mum, how about you write a book? And because I have the ability to help her, that's kind of why I did that. And there are pros and cons of running your own business, but I think that's definitely one of them. I would never have been able to do that without doing it myself.
Yeah. And it's interesting, your first few years as a writer, you were writing alongside a safe, if unfulfilling career in IT consulting. How did you manage to give that up and become a full-time professional writer? Now, did you plan for a gradual shift or was it a sudden decision? How did that happen for you?
Well, I hit 30. Like many people, I fell into a job to pay off my student loan. And then sort of 10 years later, I was still doing that. And so I was very miserable in my job. And at the time when I really cracked, I was in Australia. I was implementing financial systems, accounts payable into a mining company at the time. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? This is, what is the point? I'm working, I'm making six-figure income. I have a house and a mortgage and investments, and I am miserable. I'm doing everything I'm meant to do with my life and I hate it. And I've always been a reader, from a young age. I've always written journals and, writing was my job. I was writing technical specifications and that type of thing. And I was like, well, what if I take, I was reading so much self-help. So I thought, why don't I write a self-help book for myself and see if it actually helps anyone else. So that first book, which became Career Change. So I started writing in 2006. I published it myself in 2008. We can come back to why I went self-publishing from the beginning. But I then basically started my website, the Creative Penn, to share my lessons learned. And it took me another 3 years of part-time. So I went to 4 days a week. So this is a really good tip for people if they are wanting to transition. I went to 4 days a week with the consulting, and that extra day and the weekend and the evenings and the morning, I was able to build my business. So when I actually finally left my job in September 2011, I was making, over 1,000 a month, which wasn't enough to live on. But then within 6 months of going full time, I was able to make that enough to live on. And in 2015, I hired my husband out of his job. And now I make far more than I ever did as a consultant. So, I guess at this point, though, we should say, as we're talking, it's been 12 years since I started writing my book.
Yes, it does take time to build a viable business, doesn't it? It's not a kind of a get-rich-quick scheme.
Oh, definitely. I think that's the same in any career. I was 13 years implementing accounts payable systems. I was at like the top of that game. If
Yeah.
anyone knows SAP, that's the software I did. So I was very highly skilled in an area, and they paid me for it. So it's taken me again at this point like 12 years to get further than I was then. But it takes time. It's like you put your ladder up a wall, and I found myself up the wrong ladder, and then you have to start again at the bottom
Yeah.
of the ladder and climb that.
Yeah. The point you made just about hiring your husband, that's something I wanted to pick up on, because we tend to think of writers as being kind of a one person operation, just closeted away in the garret, with gin and a typewriter. But you've built your business now to the point where you needed more people, and you've hired your husband. How does that work for you? I mean, was it a kind of a driving need that you actually needed more resource? Was it a case of he hated his
No.
job too?
No. Well, a couple of things on that. So first of all, yes, writing is very much on my own. I am a
Yeah.
writer as Joanna Penn and JF Penn, and no one else is involved until
Yeah.
I work with my professional editor. So the first people you hire are editors, and I know you've come out of editing, so you
Oh yeah.
appreciate how important that is. So I have a whole team of freelancers I work with, cover
Yeah.
designers, website people, bookkeepers, accounting, all of that type of thing. But in terms of the writing is completely separate to the publishing. So it's really important if you're thinking about like an independent author like myself, who's
Mm.
also a business person, the publishing and marketing side of the enterprise is completely different to the artistic side.
Yeah.
And I think that is the only way to stay sane as a creative, because I cannot put the same brain in both of those roles. And
Yeah.
then into the question of hiring my husband is completely separate, because it basically was that when I got myself out of my miserable job, I was then free from the constraints of, the corporate life. And
Yeah.
my next goal was to get him out. So we had an income goal that as soon as I surpassed the income goal, he would leave his job. And
Okay.
as I said, that was 2015. So he does, for example, he's done a lot of the same publishing courses that maybe many of the listeners have done,
Uh-huh.
contracts. So, for example, he runs the Curl Up Press, which is our small press, and
Hmm.
does foreign rights negotiations, for example. Obviously, we have lawyers as well, but he does that
Yeah.
initial contract. He's just working on one right now for audiobook production, that type of thing. He does advertising. So he's not involved in my creative
Yeah.
writing side. He's involved in the publishing business.
So it's kind of helps you keep those two halves separate, as you say, because creating something is very different from the logical, pedantic kind of editing or finance or legal. Keeping those things separate is, as you say, it's got to be quite important for, particularly as you build it up into something more diverse, as you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm that diverse, to be fair. I mean, I write books, I publish books. I mean, and I share what I learn on my website, and people come along and find out. And I have a podcast, like you.
Hmm.
But basically, how I manage this is basically I manage everything on Google Calendar. Every morning, 7 a.m., I'm at a local cafe, so I get out of my office
Okay.
and I do my writing. First 3 hours of the day, I'm pretty much doing my creative work,
Yeah.
and then I do physical movement, exercise, yoga, cycling, whatever, because that's really important.
Yeah.
and then in the afternoons, I will be doing, that we're doing this in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So I do marketing, I do my blog, I do all of the stuff that runs the business. And that is the key difference, I think, between an author who works with a publisher and an author who runs their own business. Is
Yeah.
you basically you are the creative side, but then you have to also take it out into the world.
Yeah. I mean, was it all? I mean, you alluded to this earlier, but one of the things that's about being a self-published author or a micropress is that you can't just be about the creative. You have to be willing to engage with all these other things. I mean, was that something you always wanted to do? Was that kind of a desire, or was it a necessity for you?
Well, I think in a way that's not true. I think I
Okay.
don't know any traditionally published author who is not asked to do marketing.
Fair point.
So, so I think, and to be fair, the publishing bit takes no time at all because I just hire a professional.
Yeah.
But in terms of me personally, my personal choice from the beginning. So when I wrote that first book, I looked at how the publishing industry worked. I really had no clue at that point,
Mm.
and I looked at the amount of time it was going to take. So,
Hmm.
the times that people were talking about were 6 months, a year, possibly 2 years between sending a book to an agent
Yeah.
and somehow getting it through all the hoops to being published. And I was like, that's crazy. I know, I've run my own business for 18 years now.
Hmm.
So I ran my own consultancy business. I ran dive school. I run a lot of things. So my nature is to say, how can I do this? It's sort of a take action.
Hmm.
And when that first book, and this was before the Kindle, so I mean, but it was so
Yeah.
hard back then. Like you had to do print runs and actually store them somewhere. So it was really hard, but I still wanted to do it because I didn't want to wait 2 years. And so again, throughout the whole process, I've hired professionals all the way. And now, of course, we can do everything with print on demand. So I use the same services as most traditional publishers like Ingram Spark for global print on demand distribution. I use Audible. I use, all the same distributors. So it's interesting now. It's much easier to publish, but
Yeah.
of course the marketing, the writing and the marketing will always be a challenge. And luckily, I enjoy the writing and I can put up with the marketing.
It's the right way round if you're going to be an author, it seems to me.
Oh
The
yeah,
writing should be the passion, shouldn't it?
absolutely. And look, I've always said this, like if I could find a publishing partner who would care as much as I did, then I
Yeah.
would love to work with someone. But it's basically what I found. And I think, if you don't have skin in the game, so most editors at publishers, most people working at publishing houses are not paid on the success of the book.
Yeah.
Whereas I am paid on the success of my books. That's how I
Yeah.
make a living. So I have so much skin in the game. I care. Like right now, for example, I'm working on hardback editions of all my backlist. I've got 28 books at this
Yeah.
point. So this is a big deal to go back over the last 10 years and update everything into hardback.
Hmm.
But I love this format. There's no reason not to do hardbacks with print on demand.
Yeah.
And I'm updating all my back matter, fixing that little typo that got through. And this is it's one of those tasks that I just don't think many publishers care that much about, books that didn't do that well 10 years ago. You know what I mean?
This again is what, as you say, it's the skin in the game thing of running your own business or coming at it as someone who's running their own business. And that's, I think, one of the great things about the self-publishing thing. It forces you, because rather than just, it's someone else's problem, you're in charge of it. Do you find yourself experimenting more with kind of with format and with pricing and stuff than perhaps a traditionally published author is able to?
Well, yeah, obviously they can't experiment.
They don't have the control. But
yeah, I mean, what I would say is I really hate the term self-publishing. That's not what I do. I'm an independent publisher. As I said, I work with about 17 professionals at this point to put my books in, and I think in terms of experimentation, I mean, I do, in terms of, no, I don't think I necessarily experiment more than a publisher would. For example, ebook pricing plus Amazon ads and Facebook ads is something that Bookouture has done as a UK publisher that then got bought. I move quickly. I think that's really important. So, for example, I was one of the first UK authors to be on Audible when it opened up to the UK for ACX.
Yeah.
I published in translation 4 years ago into Germany. I try and push the boundaries of what I'm doing. So in that way, I'm experimenting. And for example, the hardbacks are really fun because so many, a few years ago it was, get everything into digital.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, why not do hardback? I'm doing large print editions, which so many authors don't have large print editions of their books.
Yeah.
And I'm finding large print and hardback are really brilliant on Ingram Spark because they're selling to libraries, they're selling to sight impaired people who don't want to read on a Kindle or an e-reader. So I think I can actually experiment with print form as well as audio form and digital form in a way that perhaps many publishers, because they have so many books, can't, and many authors can't because they're not doing this full time.
Yeah, and it's having the time to do that kind of stuff, because doing the POD, as you said earlier, in the old days you had to hold stock, which obviously was a reason not to have several different editions because you had to find somewhere for them. But with large print and with hardbacks and stuff, you don't have to hold that stock. Someone else is dealing with that problem for you. So the experimentation becomes more practical as well, doesn't it?
Yes, and what we're seeing, for example, with independent authors who write children's books, these have been very hard to sell digitally. But now with Amazon advertising on print, which you can now do, you can actually shift a lot of print. So print for me was only 10% of my revenue, book sales revenue last year, and this year it's 20%.
That's
so
quite a change.
yeah, what's interesting is I think what we're going to see, it was that traditional publishers were seeing ebook market share stolen, in inverted commas, by
Yeah,
indies. And now I think we're going to see print share as well.
yeah. Well, it's one of the things that seems inevitable, particularly in the fiction space to me, and in a lot of a lot of the non-fiction, the biographies and the business books and stuff, because there's so
Oh, I
much
mean,
content out there.
yeah, I mean, I sell most of my nonfiction now is print or audio, and most of my fiction is ebooks.
Yeah,
So I think that's really, and it's actually how I read myself. I read hardback and audio for nonfiction,
right.
and I read ebooks for fiction. So it's fascinating how people's reading tastes are changing over time. I hoover up nonfiction on audio now.
Uh-huh.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty well known now, as well as a writer and an independent publisher, as an advocate for other authors, for authorship, for independent authorship, and for trying to help more people to get published. I mean, how did you find yourself or get into investing so much time in helping other writers?
Well, I started the Creative Penn website in 2008 just to share my journey. And that's literally what I've done for 10 years now. December 2008 was when I started. So it's inevitable that when you spend 10 years blogging, I've been podcasting for 9 years. So I was a very early adopter in the podcasting space. I've been around a long time and, Google rewards that. And I've been consistent. So I have thousands and thousands of blog posts. I have over 400 podcast episodes, all with transcripts. I have 500 videos on YouTube. I've been on Twitter since 2009. So part of it is just that I've been around a long time and I've been talking about this for that long.
Yeah.
And I started talking about this before it was trendy. I think when we met early on, probably in 2011 or 2012, when I moved back to England, it was very noticeable how I would go to publishing events and basically like people would talk to me as if I was crazy. I mean, I saw you had Dominique Ricard on your show
Yes.
the other week, and I actually met her at the Future Book, probably 2012 it must have been, and we went out for dinner. And since then, obviously, it's become quite mainstream to be an independent author. But yeah, I mean, interesting times.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you listen to audiobooks a lot, particularly for non-fiction. Is that one of the main ways you learn how to do things better, to be a better writer, to be a better business person? Or I mean, do you find yourself talking to people? As you say, going out for dinner with people, or having advisors and mentors and stuff. And what's the way you go about learning to do things better?
Well, I mean, I read. I read. I'm one of those whale
Yeah.
readers. I mean, this is why I encourage everyone to write a book. I think if you write a book, you're going to read so many more books than you will ever write. We are a self-sustaining industry. Book people are book people. So I probably buy and read 3 to 5 books a week. I'm just a huge reader. I spend several hours a day reading. I take a lot of online courses. So at the moment, I'm actually taking 5 different online courses.
Okay.
From craft courses to I'm learning about advanced SEO for Alexa. So I'm really interested in voice technologies and how, like, I rank incredibly well on Amazon. I do rank quite well on Amazon for things, but on Google for terms in my nonfiction niche. But I want to be able to do that when someone says, talks to their Alexa or their Siri or whatever their voice device is. So I'm always learning new things because this industry is changing so fast. I mean, even things like Amazon advertising, which I learned about 18 months ago and implemented, that's changing every single day. Facebook ads, again, Instagram. I'm doing an Instagram course right now because I'm trying to get better at Instagram. I kind of nailed Twitter, but now I'm like, okay, Instagram's next. So as well as I'm doing Margaret Atwood's craft class on Masterclass, really Seth Godin's class on podcasting. So I'm just constantly learning. And again, this is one of the joys of running your own business, I think, is that I have 2 types of time in my calendar. One is asset building, and asset building is part of that creative time. But also asset building, I'm the asset. So I need to know this stuff or my business is going to disappear. My books are going to disappear. And that ain't happening.
Yeah. It's interesting because you clearly see yourself, from what you say on the website, and that kind of stuff, as primarily as a creative, but there's clearly an important aspect as that you see yourself as a learner and I guess as a teacher, because a lot of the stuff you're doing, I mean, is that learning, teaching thing something you're working on as well?
Well, I've always had, I have a model, which is consume and produce. So,
Okay.
and that works whether it's fiction or non-fiction. So my last novel, Valley of Dry Bones, was based on travels in New Orleans, in Spain, and research into things like Lima in the Philippines and the Spanish history of the Spanish in Africa. So I consumed books and travel and things, and I produced a novel out of it. And it's the same with all my nonfiction. So I consume courses on things and I try stuff out. And then I produce by my podcast every week, for example. I'm sharing what I'm learning, what I'm reading. So, for example, I'm just the book I'm listening to right now is AI Superpowers, all about the development of AI in China and how that's going to impact the next 5-10 years. And I mean that as I'm learning, I'm sharing with my audience, and it's all free, so people can listen to my podcast for free. Some of them then might go on to buy my books. I do have some courses. So yeah, I mean, but it's that consume produce model that keeps the creative well filled, and also my kind of need to create. It makes me a happy creative.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you're learning, isn't it? You have to go through this phase of processing the information somehow, and trying to convey it to somebody else is a really useful way of doing that, because you have to find your own way of expressing it and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's why I write nonfiction, because basically I think by writing, like many writers. So I don't know what I think until I write it. And so thus most of my nonfiction books have come out of trying to figure things out. So I have a book, How to Market a Book, which is because I learn stuff about marketing and then I have to figure it out somehow. So that's basically how I do things.
That kind of makes sense. Yeah. So do you find that you plan your consumption towards certain outputs? So you said you had certain travels and stuff, and that turned into a book, or you're learning about marketing, so that turned into a book. Do you plan those things, or does it come the other way around, that you just do things and something comes out at the end?
I guess it's a bit of both. I mean, I follow my curiosity.
Okay.
And my curiosity leads me to stuff. So I'm like, AI is a really good example. I am absolutely fascinated with AI. When I was at the London Book Fair, were you there this year?
Yeah.
2018, yeah, we were there, and I went to the China literature thing, and I hung out with the China literature crowd in the corner, and they had this tiny booth, and I looked at them, and from what I know about the Chinese AI with Baidu and AI translation and the massive disruption that is coming from China, I don't know if you saw this recently, but they translated 100,000 word book in 30 seconds with a translation AI, and then they spent 1 week editing it, and then they published it. And this type of stuff, my curiosity took me over to the stand, and I went to their session, China literature session, and that's led me now into this audiobook. I'm starting to research China and AI, and now we're planning a trip to China because I want to see it, and I want to see what's going on and try and understand what that means for us, because I'm 43. I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. So I'm always looking. And then for fiction, so my fiction at the moment, I'm writing, my next book will be a dark fantasy book around maps. So I do a lot of research into cartography. The first one's out already. It's called Map of Shadows, opens in Bath. So I live in Bath. And so the cartography research, I'm reading books about maps, really getting into the meanings of maps. And all of that stuff is just my curiosity, which then I turn into fiction or nonfiction or a podcast or whatever. So yeah, I mean, again, I feel so lucky to be living and working at this point in history. It just is the best time to be a creator. And everything I want to do, I can turn into a product, which means it's tax deductible.
Hey, now that's a business head. Yes.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, what's so funny, and I think this is really important for anyone listening who wants to run their own business. What I did like 10 years ago is I looked at how I wanted my life to be. So I wrote down, I want to write, I want to read, I want to travel, I want to help people. That's what I wrote down. And that's basically what I do now. So I'm just super lucky.
So if those are the things that you have your goal and that you're shooting towards, what is it that you find hardest about running a business yourself?
Well, it's probably because I'm quite a control freak in that there are things that I should outsource that I do myself.
Okay.
I still, I format my own ebooks. I do use Vellum, and I really enjoy it. I really love Vellum. If people don't know Vellum, it's just an amazing tool. It's Mac only, but it's just beautiful and it's so quick. And so, I mean, I don't have to do that, but I enjoy it. And also because I update my back matter and stuff and upload new files. I mean, I have got kind of a plan that at some point I would hire a CEO to replace me, so that I could do more writing. But actually, because I'm a business person, like for example, I will import my money into QuickBooks every day because I like to check, I have my pulse on the bank account because that's it, this is our business, it's me and my husband. So yeah, I probably the bit I don't like it the least. I love it. I love running a business, but there are definitely things that I should probably outsource. And at this point, like, I do have a wonderful virtual assistant who pretty much runs the blog for me. She does all the guest posting stuff. She does all my podcast transcript formatting, and I have an audio guy who does my podcast. And I have lots of help, but this is something I'm learning over time: is what should I outsource and what should I do myself? And inevitably over time that will change.
And what have you learned about yourself? I mean, you run, as you say, you run several businesses. I mean, what has that taught you about yourself as a person? You learn certain things about yourself from the process of creating, but from the process of running a business.
Well, I mean, like I say, I've had businesses that have failed. So, for example, I ran a dive charter business in New Zealand out to the poor nights. And what I learned then was don't run a scuba diving business. I learned, for example, we had a boat, for goodness sake. We had physical assets. We were reliant on the price of fuel. Yeah. We were reliant on people to drive the boat, to take diving. We had huge fixed and variable costs. So that taught me about outgoings and controlling your outgoings. And then I also had a property investment business, and I decided I really hated physical property. So those two, and then of course my consulting business, I was just like, I am deathly bored. So it was, I need meaning, and I have meaning helping the community, building a community. And this is a movement. Independent creation is a movement. It's in every kind of creative sphere now. But I learned that no physical product. So even though I have physical product as an author, my books all in print, hardback, large print, paperback, whatever. I don't have any in my house, so that's just magic. I'm location independent, so I run my entire business from a laptop. We move around the world. My husband's from New Zealand, so we go back and forwards. I'm often in America. So, what I learned from the failure of my other businesses, I mean, my overheads are tiny. They really are tiny. I'm in my closet talking to you right now. I don't have a shop. I mean, you look at the British High Street right now, if I had a shop, it would be crazy. So I feel like this mode of creation, with very low overheads, small investment. So the investment for me is obviously time, but then hiring an editor, hiring a cover designer, and then it's free. It's free to publish on all of these sites. And then I get a good profit because I'm doing this independently, 70% in the case of Amazon and Apple and Kobo. So it's just a great business if you compare it to physical based businesses.
Absolutely. I think I may know the answer to this one, but what is it that keeps you coming back to your business every day?
Oh, I love it. I mean, I hope you can tell that. I mean, I love writing. I love the business. I love the community. It's so I'm very, very sad when I hear authors say how lonely their lives are as authors, because there's such a massive community now. It's huge. I'm a proud member of the Alliance of Independent Authors. We just, we have a great time. We are at London Book Fair every year. So if people listening do come, we're often up near Amazon promoting all the other vendors. But it's, it's just a great time to be a creative. I love learning, obviously, so I'm constantly excited about the opportunities that are coming our way, and the tools that I can start using. I have so much. I mean, the content for the Creative Penn is planned out 6 months ahead right now because I have so much I want to share. Because it's such an exciting time, and there's new people coming in every single day, writing, publishing. As I said, coming back to, we are book lovers. Anyone listening to your I presume, is a book lover. And so, I don't think there's any division between us. I am an author as well, but I also do contracts for intellectual property rights. So I
Yeah.
understand what publishers go through. But what gets me up every day is how much I love doing what I do. And I definitely do work too hard, but that's because I love it. And it's
Yeah.
not, I don't ever leave it. There's nowhere to leave it in terms of going home. This is my home.
Brilliant. Well, that's been fantastic. Thanks very much for your time, Joanna. It's been wonderful.
No worries. And if anyone wants to check anything out, I'm at thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N, or on Twitter at thecreativepenn.
That's fantastic. We'll put some links to that in the story matter as well for the podcast. Thanks, Joanna.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Joanna for that really interesting conversation. And that, folks, that, starting a business, whether that's as an author or anything else, isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. But that you can start a new career as a writer or whatever if you realise you just climbed the wrong ladder and you don't enjoy what you're doing, however well it might pay. And that writing is a solitary exercise, but publishing isn't. You need those editors and designers and accountants and lawyers or whatever to succeed at that side of it. And you have to remember that those two things are quite different, the creative side and the business side. And that's true, I think, whatever you're doing. But that even a diehard indie like Joanna would work with a publishing partner very happily if she could find one who cares about the product, about the books, as much as she does. And as she says, though, it's an interesting dilemma because, of course, staff at most publishers are not paid based on the success of the books they publish. Whereas, of course, Joanna, as the author and independent publisher, is. I am fascinated as well by what she was saying about, a few years ago, of course, yes, it was all about ebooks and digital, but that now she's focusing on hardbacks and large print editions. I think that's really, really interesting, particularly where, print revenues are really starting to make a difference to her business. Doubling in a year is pretty impressive, even if it's, 10% to 20%, that's still very significant. So thanks again to Joanna for that interview. As ever, please do subscribe to the podcast through your podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts or whatever, or give us a like or a review. It really does help people to find out what's going on. Next week, in a special pre-Christmas episode, I'm talking to Bill Rosenblatt, who has lots of experience and lots to say about transformations within publishing and media in general, and particularly some really interesting stuff about how publishing and music compare and don't compare. So do come back and listen to that next week. Until then, have a good week. This was Talking Through My Hat, a podcast by John Pettigrew, founder of We Are Future Proofs. Please let me know your thoughts by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts or by commenting on the website, myhat.wearefutureproofs.com. You can subscribe to this channel at Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is from hooksounds.com.